The church was silent, save for the soft hum of organ music drifting through the air. Rows of stoic men and women in military uniform lined the pews, their medals glinting under the light filtering through the stained glass windows. It was a moment of solemnity and respect for a fallen hero, a Navy SEAL who had died protecting his country. Friends, family, and fellow servicemen gathered to honor his memory. In the parking lot outside, however, a scene of tension and disbelief began to unfold. Elijah Rowan, a decorated black Navy SEAL and best friend of the deceased, arrived late due to a flight delay. Wearing his formal dress uniform, adorned with medals from multiple tours of duty, he stepped out of his car and adjusted the hat on his neatly cropped hair. As he approached the church doors, he noticed a police cruiser parked awkwardly near the entrance. A white officer, later identified as Sergeant Richard Hawthorne, stood outside, arms crossed, scanning the arriving guests. Known in the community for his aggressive demeanor and unchecked bias, Hawthorne's eyes immediately narrowed when he saw Elijah. "Excuse me, sir," Hawthorne barked as he stepped directly into Elijah's path. "What are you doing here?" Calm and polite, Elijah replied. "I'm here for the funeral. I was a close friend of the deceased." Hawthorne scoffed and looked him up and down, his gaze lingering on the medals, as if questioning their authenticity. "Funny you don't look like you belong in a place like this," he said, tone dripping with disdain. Nearby guests began to turn their heads, sensing the rising tension. Elijah remained composed. "I don't see how that's relevant, officer. I'm here to pay my respects." Hawthorne took a step closer, invading his personal space. "We don't tolerate trespassers. I suggest you turn around and leave before this becomes a bigger issue." His hand drifted instinctively toward his holster. Elijah raised a hand calmly. "Officer, I am not trespassing. I was invited just like everyone else. If you would kindly step aside, I'll proceed to the funeral." Hawthorne's eyes flashed with suspicion. "I don't care who you say you are. I need to see some ID now." Elijah inhaled deeply, keeping his composure even as the air grew thick. He reached into his jacket pocket and slowly pulled out his military ID. "Here's my identification. Lieutenant Commander Elijah Rowan, U.S. Navy SEALs. Is this sufficient for you?" Hawthorne barely glanced at it before sneering. "Anyone can fake one of these. How do I know you didn't steal it? A man like you driving that car and wearing that uniform doesn't add up." Several guests gasped audibly as the pastor himself peered out the doorway in shock. Before Hawthorne could escalate further, a middle-aged Marine stepped forward. "Officer Hawthorne, that's enough. Do you even know who you're talking to? This man is a decorated SEAL. He served alongside the man we're here to honor." Hawthorne waved him off. "Stay out of this. This is a matter of public safety. I've got it under control." Then paranoia and hostility overtook him. "Step back," he barked, drawing his gun and pointing it directly at Elijah. The crowd froze in horror. Elijah stood perfectly still, hands raised in surrender. "You're pointing a gun at an unarmed officer of the United States military," he said evenly. "Think carefully about your next move." Spectators erupted into murmurs of outrage, many were recording on their phones as Hawthorne's trembling hand held the weapon. Confused and angry, Hawthorne shouted, "I'll be the one asking the questions. Here, get down on the ground now." Elijah did not flinch. He remained calm and resolute. "I won't resist you, officer, but you're making a mistake that will cost you more than you realize." The crowd's shock rippled into anger as the standoff continued. Several veterans in attendance began to move closer, their voices sharp and insistent. "Put that gun down." Hawthorne, one elderly man, barked, his medals glinting in the sunlight as he stepped forward. "You're pointing it at a Navy SEAL. Do you even realize what you're doing?" But Hawthorne ignored the rising outrage around him, his focus laser sharp on Elijah. His grip on the gun was steady, though sweat now beaded on his forehead. His voice was unsteady, but his words were soaked in prejudice. "I don't care who you say you are. You look out of place here, and I won't let you disrupt this service." Elijah remained calm, though his heart was pounding. He knew one wrong move could escalate the situation into something catastrophic. "Officer, I'm not disrupting anything," he said evenly. "I'm here to honor a brother in arms, someone I served alongside, someone I'd give my life for." But right now, it's clear that you've lost control of yourself. You don't tell me about control. Hawthorne spat, his voice cracking. His finger twitched near the trigger, sending gasps rippling through the crowd. A woman sobbed audibly, clutching her child close as she tried to shield them from the sight. Elijah held his hands higher, his voice rising slightly, but still firm and steady. Look around you, officer. Look at the people that are recording this. Everything you're doing right now is on camera. And believe me, when this footage gets out, your career won't just be over, it'll be destroyed. The mention of cameras caused Hawthorne to falter momentarily. His eyes darted to the crowd where phones were raised in nearly every direction. The reality of the situation seemed to crash over him in a wave, but his pride and anger kept him from backing down. You think you can intimidate me with that uniform and those cameras, he growled. You don't scare me. Elijah wasn't trying to scare him. He was trying to reason with a man who clearly lacked any. You've already gone too far, Elijah said softly, but you still have a chance to step back and make this right. You can put that gun away and let me walk into the church to say goodbye to my friend, or you can let your anger and your prejudice ruin your life. The crowd fell silent as Elijah's words hung in the air. For a moment it seemed as though Hawthorne might lower the gun. His hand wavered, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. But then with a defiant snarl, he raised his voice and took a step closer. On the ground now, the command was met with collective outrage. This is insane, someone shouted. We've got everything on video. You're done, Hawthorne. A young woman with a phone yelled. Enough, came a deep, authoritative voice from the church steps. The pastor, an older black man with a commanding presence, stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of years of leadership and wisdom. Sergeant Hawthorne, I suggest you lower that weapon before you make a mistake you'll never be able to take back. The pastor's words cut through the tension like a knife, his commanding tone silencing the growing chaos. All eyes turned to the church steps as he strode forward, his long robes billowing slightly in the breeze, his face a mix of calm authority and righteous anger. Sergeant Hawthorne, the pastor, repeated, his voice steady but sharp. You are pointing a gun at a man who has served this country with honor and distinction. This is a place of peace, and you are desecrating it with your actions. Hawthorne hesitated, the tremor in his hand, now visible. For a moment it seemed the officer might lower the weapon, but then his pride flared again, fueled by the weight of all the eyes and cameras on him. He shook his head defiantly. He's refusing to comply. This is a matter of safety. I'm just doing my job, Hawthorne said. The pastor didn't flinch. His gaze bore into Hawthorne with an intensity that cut through the night. Seems to strip away the officer's defenses. Your job is to protect and serve, not to harass and threaten innocent people. Look at him. He gestured toward Elijah, who stood tall and unyielding, his hand still raised. This man is not a threat. He is a hero, and right now you are dishonoring everything that uniform stands for. The crowd murmured in agreement. Vo is growing louder in support of the pastor. Put the gun down. Hawthorne, someone yelled. You're embarrassing yourself, Hawthorne. His face reddened as his authority crumbled before him. His grip on the gun tightened, but his resolve was wavering. He glanced around at the crowd, at the phones recording every second, and at the rows of uniformed servicemen and women staring at him with barely restrained fury. You're digging your own grave, Hawthorne said, the Marine who had spoken earlier, his voice cold and hard. You think anyone here is going to back you up after this? You're pointing a gun at one of our own. Still, Hawthorne hesitated, his pride battling with the crushing weight of the situation. Then Elijah spoke again, his voice calm but cutting through the chaos like a blade. Sergeant, he said, his tone measured and deliberate. You're going to regret this moment for the rest of your life if you don't stop now. This isn't just about me or you. It's about every person here who served their country, who came to honor our fallen brother. Right now, you're not just disrespecting me, you're disrespecting his memory, his sacrifice. Those words seemed to strike a nerve. Hawthorne's eyes darted to the church where a large portrait of the deceased Navy SEAL stood surrounded by flowers. His grip faltered, the gun lowering slightly. The reality of what he was doing, what he had become in that moment, finally began to sink in. But before he could act, the sound of a car screeching to a halt nearby shattered the fragile silence. A second police cruiser pulled up, and two officers jumped out, their faces a mix of urgency and alarm. One of them, black officer with the rank of lieutenant, quickly assessed the scene and barked, "Hawthorne, stand down now." Hawthorne froze, his authority completely stripped away. The lieutenant stepped forward, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Holster your weapon immediately. That's an order." For a long, tense moment, Hawthorne stood there, his face pale and his hand trembling. Finally, he let out a shuddering breath and lowered the gun, sliding it back into his holster. The crowd exhaled, collectively, relief washing over the tense atmosphere. The lieutenant turned to Elijah, his expression apologetic and respectful. "Sir, are you all right?" Elijah nodded, his composure unshaken. "I'm fine. Thank you for stepping in, but the incident wasn't over yet. Hawthorne, hand over your badge and gun. You're done here." Hawthorne's face turned a deep shade of red, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to process what was happening. "Lieutenant, you can't be serious," he stammered. "I was just doing my job, this man." You pointed a weapon at an unarmed man, a Navy SEAL in full uniform at a funeral. The lieutenant cut him off sharply, his voice filled with restrained fury. "And you did it in front of dozens of witnesses and cameras. Do you even hear yourself right now? Hand over your badge and gun." The crowd, which had been murmuring in anger moments ago, now watched in silence as Hawthorne's defiance crumbled. With shaking hands, he unclipped his badge from his uniform and handed it over, followed by his gun. His shoulders slumped. The weight of his actions began to settle on him. "Making a mistake," Hawthorne mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean no," the lieutenant interrupted coldly. "The only mistake here was yours. Now step back and wait for internal affairs to handle this." As Hawthorne retreated to the side, his humiliation evident, the crowd erupted in quiet cheers and murmurs of approval. Elijah lowered his hand slowly, his calm demeanor never wavering. He adjusted his uniform and stepped toward the lieutenant, extending his hand. "Thank you for stepping in. When you did," Elijah said sincerely. "No, thank you, Lieutenant Commander Rowan," the lieutenant replied, shaking his hand firmly. "On behalf of this department, I apologize for what just happened. It should never have come to this." Elijah gave a small nod. "Apology accepted, but this isn't just about me. Incidents like this happen far too often, and they don't always end as peacefully as this one did." The lieutenant's face tightened with understanding. "I know, and I assure you this will be addressed. Hawthorne's actions won't go unchecked." As the crowd began to disperse, Elijah turned toward the church, ready to finally say goodbye to his fallen comrade. But just as he reached the steps, a voice called out from behind him, "Lieutenant Commander Rowan." He turned to see the Marine who had spoken up earlier, walking toward him. The man stopped, his expression one of deep, deep respect. "I just wanted to say thank you. The way you handled yourself back there was nothing short of incredible. You didn't just keep your cool, you showed all of us what real strength looks like." Elijah smiled faintly, his voice calm yet firm. "It's not about strength, it's about doing what's right, even when it's hard. That's what we were trained to do, wasn't it?" The Marine nodded solemnly, clasping Elijah's shoulder. When they were inside the church, the organ music had stopped and the service was about to begin. Elijah took a deep breath and walked through the doors, his steps steady and purposeful. He took a seat near the front, flanked by others in uniform, and allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Meanwhile, outside, the fallout was already beginning. Hawthorne stood by his cruiser, his head bowed as other officers arrived to take his statement and escort him away. The cameras that had recorded everything were already being uploaded to social media, the incident spreading like wildfire. Unbeknownst to Hawthorne, the video would soon go viral, sparking outrage and calls for systemic change within the police department. The footage showed not only his reckless actions, but also the calm and composed way Elijah had handled the situation, a stark contrast that painted Hawthorne's behavior in an even harsher light. As the service inside the church began, the seeds of accountability and justice were already taking root. Outside, the video spread across social media like wildfire, accompanied by headlines that read, "Racist cop points gun, a black Navy SEAL at a military funeral, and decorated SEAL confronted by officer in shocking incident." News outlets picked up the story within hours, and the footage was broadcast nationwide. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Social media platforms were flooded with outrage, calling for Sergeant Hawthorne to face legal consequences for his actions. Within the walls of the police department, the fallout was swift. The footage reached the desk of the police chief by the end of the day, and an emergency meeting was called. The chief, a stern but fair man with decades of experience, watched the video in grim silence, his face hardening with every second. By the time it ended, he looked up at the assembled senior officers and said, "We cannot defend this. This is not who we are or who we should ever be." Meanwhile, Elijah returned home after the funeral, still wearing his uniform. The weight of the day's events hung heavy on him, but he knew his work wasn't done. As he sat at his desk, he began drafting a statement to accompany the video. In it, he didn't just address the actions of Sergeant Hawthorne, he spoke to the larger issues of systemic prejudice and the need for accountability in law enforcement. Today's incident is a stark reminder that bias and injustice can rear their heads even in moments of mourning and respect, Elijah wrote. But this is not just about one officer or one incident. It is about a culture that allows such behavior to persist. We owe it to those who serve, those who sacrifice, and those who believe in justice to demand better. The statement was posted alongside the video on Elijah's social media accounts. The video went viral almost immediately. Thousands of comments poured in, many from fellow service members. "Thank you for standing tall, sir," one read, while another said, "You handled this with the grace and strength of a true leader." As public pressure mounted, the mayor condemned Sergeant Hawthorne's actions and ordered a full investigation. Community leaders and activists organized peaceful protests and demanded police reform. Hawthorne was placed on administrative leave, his future bleak amid growing evidence and backlash. Even his fellow officers, some of whom had served alongside Elijah, voiced disgust, calling for change. "What happened could have happened to anyone," one said, "and we must address it head on." For Elijah, the incident was a painful reminder of the challenges Black service members face, but also a chance to drive reform. Interview and speaking requests flooded in, offering him a platform to advocate for accountability. Before his first televised interview, he steadied himself in front of the mirror, recalling the values that guided his service: courage, integrity, and resilience. When the interview aired, millions tuned in to hear him speak candidly about systemic racism, his military experience, and the need for unity. His calm, articulate call for justice resonated nationwide. Meanwhile, the investigation deepened. Complaints once dismissed were re-examined, revealing a pattern of bias and excessive force. Under intense scrutiny, the police department terminated Hawthorne, and the district attorney announced criminal charges, including misconduct and unlawful use of a firearm. Relief quietly spread through the ranks as officers admitted they had long known of Hawthorne's behavior. Elijah's story, underscored by his composed, principled response, became a powerful symbol of integrity and a catalyst for lasting change. He closed the funeral without shame or blame, but with a lesson: empathy, respect, and understanding. Urging recruits to become the change their communities needed, he ended to a standing ovation. In the weeks that followed, the department rolled out reforms, mandatory bias training, a transparent complaint process, and community outreach. At a press conference, the mayor, joined by Elijah, and local leaders announced these steps and vowed continued progress. "Today is the first step," Elijah said. "Change takes accountability, and we all must play our part." Back home, the fallen SEAL's younger sister embraced him, tears in her eyes. "My brother would be so proud," she whispered. Her words stayed with Elijah as he reflected on a week that turned injustice into a movement. Meanwhile, Sergeant Hawthorne's trial became a test of law enforcement accountability. Overwhelming evidence led to a swift, guilty verdict for misconduct and unlawful use of a firearm. Sentenced to prison, Hawthorne left the courtroom in handcuffs, a warning to others who might abuse power. Nationwide, Elijah became a symbol of resilience. Invited to speak at universities' advocacy groups and a major law enforcement reform convention, he reminded audiences that collective action and courage can overcome bias and inspire real change. In the small town where it began, the church that hosted the funeral became a symbol of unity and healing. The pastor who intervened held a special ceremony honoring the fallen SEAL and Elijah's courage, bringing together veterans, law enforcement, and community members in solidarity. At the podium, Elijah reflected, "We cannot let one person's hate define us. We must respond with strength, unity in action. That's how we honor their sacrifice and keep their legacy alive. The crowd rose in thunderous applause, including the Marine who had spoken up, the SEAL's family and officers nodding in respect. Meanwhile, Hawthorne sat isolated in prison, forced to confront his actions alone. Whether he would change remained unknown. For Elijah and those touched by his story, the focus turned to the future. He continued advocating for justice and equality so that no one else would endure his ordeal. Though change was gradual, the ripple from that single moment at a military funeral was undeniable. Policies shifted, conversations deepened, and communities demanded fairness. Through it all, Elijah's resilience and calm in the face of injustice reminded everyone that even in darkness, the light of change can shine. From this story, we learn that injustice is not only visible, but also hidden within seemingly harmless procedures, and the voice of a single individual who dares to speak up can awaken collective conscience. The most important message is the power of courage, perseverance, and faith in justice, even when the system has loopholes and entrenched biases. If you were the protagonist witnessing such an explosive incident, the first priority would be the victim's safety, followed by swiftly gathering evidence, contacting independent oversight organizations, and preparing a transparent communication strategy to force the responsible agencies to act. Next, you would call on the community to come together, organize workshops, and provide awareness training about the problems of racial discrimination to prevent similar incidents from recurring. As for 2050, racism will not vanish on its own if people remain indifferent to differences and do not actively challenge ingrained prejudices. To truly end this scourge, we must continue. Legal reforms promote multicultural education from elementary school onward and encourage every individual to become an ambassador of tolerance in daily life. Only when everyone dares to question themselves, confront injustices, and firmly fight for equality can racism realistically be pushed back and possibly eradicated before 2050. Disclaimer. This story is entirely fictional. All characters and events are creations of the author and are not intended to reference or criticize any real person. It is designed to raise awareness of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating one another with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose all forms of violence, prejudice, and injustice. Please consider this before viewing.